Hi everybody, welcome to our lecture for Chapter 3 from the Kachur book. If you notice that some of the text is off, once again, I'm doing this on a computer that has the absolute newest version of PowerPoint, so in order to get the full graphic and the full picture, made sure that I changed the background template so you could see it, so this won't match up with the one that you have that's in your slideshow. But this is a good lecture. We're going to be talking about successful walkthroughs, what they look like, in kind of how you know whether or not a walkthrough is going to work or not. This is a research-driven chapter. It really looks at what the authors conducted during their study in the states that they observed, what a good walkthrough looks like, what are the takeaway messages, what should teachers be thinking of it. I want you to look at not the research because this is a master's level course. We're really not concerned with the research here. We're more concerned with the outcomes and the elements that were looked at in classrooms while they actually participated in the walkthrough. So there were 5 basic components that were looked at. The first was the protocol. How often did they do it? How much time was spent? The second was who participated in the walkthrough, whether or not it was teachers or administrators. If you know one thing from what I've been saying throughout class now, teachers are the ones that have to lead this procedure, especially if it's teachers leading teachers and observing teachers. Whether or not the focus of the walkthrough was a curriculum walk or student engagement, doesn't matter which of the two it is, as long as it's tied back to student learning, you're fine. What's the data gathering process? If you leave this class without an idea of how to gather data, then I have screwed up in life. You should know how to gather data by the time you leave this class. And then how is feedback given? Do we do it individually to each teacher, or do we do it as a group to all the teachers? Those are the big ideas, and that's what I want you to think about as we go through this procedure today. So, most of the schools that are using these models are using ones that were locally designed. For me, as an observer, I found that to be awesome, because the organization can then customize them to themselves. As I've said 100 times, I am an organizational theorist. That means that I know that the assessments that I'm making are in the best interest of the organization, but the problem becomes if you jump school districts, because when you jump from District A to District B to District C, that becomes your challenge more than anything else. So I love Florida. Florida is my dream state, my dream location, you know, my dream job, my dream life, and hopefully one day I get to Florida eventually. They use a county system. They have 67 counties, but each of the counties use either the Danielson model or the Marzano model of supervision. If you're an assistant principal, it's almost nearly impossible to jump counties if you're in a Danielson county to go to a Marzano one, because the training is all done in-house and it is specific to the county. So it's a statement thing that I think is a big problem with succession planning in Florida. And the research I'm doing right now on succession planning, this is one of my problems with Florida, is their model of supervision and how they use it. So we'll look at all 9 of the models that were presented in the text. If any of these interest you, there have been plenty of research articles on them. I have only used 2 of these ever in my public school career. 7 of these are completely brand new to me, so I thought that was pretty cool because I was learning with this as I went, and it gave me a better perspective on some of the walkthrough models that you might be using eventually at one of your schools. So, number 1 is data in a day. There are structured visits throughout the building, throughout different classrooms, that focus on just gathering as much possible data as they can, really as a way to take that data and improve how the teachers are teaching and how the teachers know that students are learning in a classroom. Normally, it's a parent, a teacher, a student, and a principal. They summarize what they saw and they provide feedback to the building staff, and people aren't individualized. IPI is when we're looking at 6 instructional engagement strategies using a rubric and seeing if students are actually engaged in what's going on in the classroom. The big key about this is it's used not to do teaching pedagogy, but it's instead focused on student instructional engagement. I worked at a district that claimed they were doing this model. They were not doing this model. Everything came down to how the teachers taught and why the teaching pedagogy was more important than the student instructional strategy, than the students being engaged. And they always would say, well, the students aren't engaged because the pedagogy wasn't appropriate. If you look at the inventory and you look at the categories, this is one that I think is good, but you have to make sure that people are trained on it, because if they're not, that can be an even bigger problem. instructional rounds, this is the sexy model right now. Everybody's using it. It's in all of our school systems, and if you're doing anything with instruction, you know this model. Monthly visits from the teacher, the principal, even central office staff. They go to buildings, they walk around, they offer feedback, they offer suggestions, and they get a vibe for the building. The feedback round just generates a report, and then the report is given to the building principal to say, this is what we saw, this is what was good, this is what was bad, but once again, no individual teachers are highlighted in this process. The feedback process of this has to follow a 4-step model. This is a big deal, and it's something that for the districts that are using instructional rounds, I know Owasso is right now, this is what is part of their feedback round. The first thing that you do, you describe what was observed in classes. The second thing, analyze any patterns that you saw from those observations. Then you predict what kind of learning could happen, what might happen from the teaching, and then you recommend things that could make the process better and help improve the school and help the school meet its instructional goals. Instructional rounds is different than instructional rounds network. The reason being is this is the Marzano version. This is directly linked to the Marzano model using the Marzano snapshot. But this is done more for the observers, not the observees. In the case of this, the observing teachers are going to another classroom and they're saying, I want to get better in one of the domains on the Marzano model. So they develop a plan of how they want to integrate it into their teaching. They go to other classes and see how it's done from other teachers. I think that's a good model. The learning walk routine. Classroom observations are on what students learn in student actions. Everybody walks around. The observers write questions for the teachers, but they don't give feedback. So if you've seen the learning walk routine, I always used to call this the exit card model because they take on an index card, they write out, what would you do if A, B, and C happen? Leave it for the teacher, and the teacher's supposed to think about that, and that's supposed to be used and done in a way that improves their instructional practice. Look to learning. I saw this done in Indiana when I was researching there, but I never used it. But when I was doing some succession planning work in Indiana, Look to Learning was the model that they used. You speak to students during class to figure out what the students are learning. Then you give data back to the staff anonymously, and you implement it into staff development. So, in this Look to Learning model that I was just fascinated by, if there was a room full of 20 students, a principal, a teacher could just pull one of them aside and say, so tell me about what you're working on today. I see that you're doing multiplication by 3 digits now. What have you learned about that? How good are you with multiplication at 2 digits? How did you learn that? Has your teacher done a good job in showing you how to do it? What were the instructional strategies used? Imagine being a teacher, being up in front of a room while you know that somebody's asking your student those questions. That's why this model didn't go over too well, but yes, I've seen this one in action, I've seen it used. I don't want to say that I've seen it work, but I know this model exists, and I have seen it. So the McRel Power Walkthrough is something that I wish I had a lot of money out of if I would have developed a way to turn observations into a computerized system using Bloom's taxonomy, and had an app that was purely easily done. Just pop things in, bing, bang, boom, give reports, and see what kind of questioning activities are going through, and how you know that those questioning activities relate to student learning, observation, and student engagement. This is another one that, once again, if I would have been the one that invented this app, any of us, we could have been multimillionaires. So, apologize, was one of the ones that I guess kind of changed when I had to update the background so you could see it on your video. This is the Teachscape Reflect Classroom Walkthrough. The Teachscape Reflect Classroom Walkthrough. This is a mobile technology one that is done with checklists. Every single person takes their mobile phone and they go into the classroom, they have the rooms entered in on the app, and then they're looking for look-fors. So they're seeing if there's student engagement, if there are resources used, what the learning environment looks like, Bloom's taxonomy, and then they just basically type in on their phone whether or not it was met, set it to a consortium that puts all the data together, and then there's a report generated based off of that data. The UCLA CenterX Classroom Walkthrough. This is an observation model that really looks at teacher speak and student speak, and all that you do is you write down what's heard, and then what's heard, you make your decisions based off of, but you don't add any interpretations. The staff work with you to determine how you interpret what the next steps are, and also what those next steps are supposed to look like. So, another important thing is the observers, the frequency and the lengths of the observations. The best way to do this, and you're going to hear me say this in the last 2 chapters, if you can have teachers observe and not share data with administrators, you improve morality, things are more confidential, instruction improves. I like the idea of same subject teachers doing observations, but in my dream world, if you have, 5 elementary schools, I would have the third grade teachers from one building go to the other building and flip-flop. That way that can at least eliminate personal bias and subjectivity a little bit. Do you have time to do that? I don't know, but it's the approach that I would take. So then we have this notion of focus areas and look-fors, because if we're doing anything, in order for us to do it, we have to know specifically what we're looking for. So schools are looking for implementation of professional development models. Is what was being taught to teachers actually being done in my classroom? Once again, I think that's another one that's easier said than done. If there are curricular and instructional initiatives that are going on, if the district and school strategic plan is somewhat being worked into the class, if there are supposed to be objectives written according to the Common Core standards on the wall before every lesson, that's written, that's clear, and any data that was provided to teachers from previous walkthroughs that at least it was reflected upon as well. So, what should you be doing during a walkthrough? Well, I believe you should focus on the instructional practices of the teacher or on what students are doing. Those are interrelated, so you could focus on both. You have to be open-ended enough to allow possibilities to emerge that had not been considered initially. Don't make blanket statements. That's one of the worst things that you can do. You're not there to measure. Measure alludes to evaluation. You're there to discover. Use the correct words, use the correct terminology, because you don't want your teaching staff on edge. Make sure that you can answer by observations, descriptions, and interactions. And if you have data that can provide information about progress, that's going to be good, and that's going to help improve the teacher, and it's going to help improve the morale in your classroom as well. So, what are forms? They're provided in the book, but I would advise you to make your own forms. We give you some protocols that are in the book. We've done it in every book for this class, but the things you could do a checklist, because a checklist is unassuming. You could have a checklist with space for written comments. That one could be a little more challenging because you're basically justifying why you gave somebody a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1, or an above average, or an exceeds expectations, that sort of thing. Or just a blank space that has space for written comments only that can help the teacher with what they're doing as well. So, if there's good walkthrough observation software, it's being developed. I've seen some examples of it. It's a hot button issue all throughout education. And if you want to do anything to protect anonymity in your building, walkthrough observation software is a good way to do it. Because you can keep all the information in one location, share it as you need it. If you're using iPads for walkthroughs, you can train the teachers to do it so that they don't give the information to others, and as soon as the walkthrough is over, they can't save it. All they have to do is hit a button, ping, it gets sent to the principal. The principal is the one that aggregates the data. Or an instructional coach, or a principal at another building. That way there's not biases. So we spoke about at the beginning of the course kind of this notion of adult learners. Feedback has to be specific to them and their needs. And they're not going to buy all the time what a principal tells them they need to do to make it better. So my advice is have the teachers give them feedback, because it can potentially calm them, not leave them overly panicked, and it'll let them know that what happened during the walkthrough is not going to be used against them in a court of law, blah, blah, blah. Basically, it's not going to go into their evaluations. If you do group feedback, it has to come back with no identifiers. Think about what would happen if you had a classroom, if you had an assembly hall full of 80 teachers, and you said there were 5 teachers that failed their walkthrough, teacher 12, teacher 14, teacher 18, and then you gave them their subject area or grade level. People would probably be able to figure it out. Teachers should be able to comment on the results and offer their own opinions, but the data should not be individually given to teachers unless we're looking at a mentoring coaching role, which in that case, in a true model, the principal would have absolutely nothing to do with it if you're doing it properly and appropriately. Teachers do better with feedback. That was the point of our instructional rounds in our conferencing that we spoke about throughout this class. If the protocol doesn't allow for interpretation and just a presentation of data, make sure the protocol is followed perfectly. That way the teacher can't say that there were anything that was against them. And remember, we're doing this system trying to get teachers to buy into it. That's the point of it. So you could also do a newsletter or letter, same deal, be confidential, make sure that it's group feedback, it's constructive and positive, and it has nothing to do with the evaluation process. The other thing you could do is give no feedback at all. I thought about this for a while and said, well, I kind of understand why they're suggesting that, but then I know that I would be paranoid like crazy if this happened. I think if I was in a room and people didn't give me answers or didn't tell me, good job, Lou, you did a great job, or Lou, you could be doing this better, I'm going to be on edge. But sometimes if teachers can do this, let's the other teacher know that the teacher that's being observed know that they have a support that's outside of administration and that the observation process isn't a big deal. Once the observation is over, you have to agree upon follow-up steps that are going to improve the process in your building and improve teaching and learning. My advice is you take the data from observations and tie it somehow to professional development. If the data is consistent enough and it's linked to professional development, everybody wins. And then there's a clear understanding of what the data is going to be used for and how the district's going to use it. In the overall sample looked at by the authors, there wasn't one perfect model. The key thing is, something was always recorded and teachers knew what was seen. So if you take something out of this, if you can somehow give teachers something tangible, whether it be a newsletter or a form that says what happened, or recorded method, that's going to help improve practice and improve student learning, and I would strongly suggest that. So the next chapter really looks at ways to get teachers involved, which, as I've said, this is the challenge, but we've kind of covered this a lot throughout the class, and I think you've brainstormed and I think you have some ideas for it. So if there's anything else I can do to help, let me know, and I hope you got something out of this video, which sets up very nicely into the next chapter. Thank you.